My father refused to walk me down the aisle because his golden daughter was having a housewarming party that day, but he calls me in desperation when I got a replacement for a long time. I always knew my parents loved my older sister Vicky more than me. She was the planned daughter while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy. Just 10 months later, they probably didn't even love me, but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was born, but my father's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Grandma and Grandpa were the constants in my life, providing the love and support. I often felt I was lacking from my own parents. I remember so many times my parents would leave me behind with my grandparents and just take my sister on trips when I was young. I didn't mind because it was fun living with my grandparents. But as I grew up when I was 6 or 7 years old, I realized how unfair this all was. But my problem wasn't just with my parents, it was also with my sister Vicky. Although I didn't harbor any resentment towards Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted addition to the family. She knew it too. And she made me feel like an outsider every day in my own house. She was always competing with me for everything, whether it was grades, the attention of our parents, or even the smallest achievements. It felt like a constant battle for validation. And I was always on the losing end because my parents preferred her always. As a result, I felt really inferior, and we never understood each other at all. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual competition, with her always coming out on top. On one occasion, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but since she was a nerd, she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so she introduced me to the rest of the group and we all used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she made my parents talk to me to include her whenever I was with them. I would try to fight, but my mother would call me selfish. While my father would say she was my sister and that I should look after her, I reluctantly agreed and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Now Vicky doesn't have many friends, so she can seem overly enthusiastic. So she was constantly trying to impress the girls in our group, often resulting in annoying. Despite her efforts, she struggled to find her place amongst them. And the awkward tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls was interested in a boy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the boy and let him know that she liked the girl. He laughed because he wasn't interested and went and told everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After this, the girls clearly told me no. They wanted me to bring Vicky to our meetings. So I agreed. However, Vicky didn't accept it. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls didn't want anything to do with her, and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't spend time with these mean girls either. Since I was her sister, and I should stand up for her, I refused, and told her that it was her fault that they didn't want to be friends with her. But my parents, as always, supported her. They gave me a talk about how Vicky didn't have bad intentions, that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky. But if they didn't, then I should also stay away from them. I refused and stood my ground. I liked hanging out with them, and unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to jeopardize my friendship. No way, I told my parents that I had had enough, and that it wasn't my responsibility to find AIG for Vicky. My parents got angry, and they turned their backs on me for weeks, but I'm glad I stood my ground. This group of girls have remained my friends to this day, and are basically like my sisters. I have cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most meaningful moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was also another incident with a boy. She had a crush on a boy I had no idea about, and who I sat with in some classes because we were friends. She tried to ask me to the prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a big fuss about it, telling my parents how she always brought me things she wanted and that she flirted with the boy, knowing how she felt. For months, she called me a bunch of nasty words that no one should ever say to their own sister, and she told my parents how she wished I would. If I wasn't her sister, my mother took her side, telling me that what I had done was wrong, and that as a sister, I should respect the girl code. I tried to tell them that I wasn't even interested in the guy, and that I had turned down his invitation, so she was free to ask him if he wanted to. But Vicky refused to let it go. Looking back, I think she knew the guy would have turned her down anyway, so she just wanted to get even with me, because he had invited me, instead of her. One time, my dad took me out to get ice cream, telling me that he wanted to spend father and daughter time with me. This had never happened before. So I was really happy. However, he started to ask me a bunch of questions like if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if my boyfriend and I did drugs. I was shocked by his line of questions and asked him what he meant by all that. That was when my dad revealed. I saw that I had been making up stories, telling my parents for months that I was doing drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to verify that Vicky was lying later. When my dad confronted her about all the lies she tried to justify, that no one our age just spends time with a guy, and that I was hiding things from everyone. I was so angry I yelled at her for trying to create an unnecessary problem, and told her it wasn't my fault that she didn't have anyone to date, but that she needed to stop butting into my life. Vicky didn't accept it and hit me. This happened out of nowhere as I had never been physically violent before. My nose started bleeding as I fell to the ground, clutching my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital, and all the while they were begging me not to file a complaint against Vicky, saying how I would ruin her life while I was sitting in the back seat clutching my face. Vicky didn't even care. She didn't even apologize later when the nurse. She asked me about the incident. I told her the truth, and she called Child Protective Services. My parents were furious with me for involving Child Protective Services, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty in their eyes. Vicky's actions were treated as a mere accident, an isolated incident that did not warrant such drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me and that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was released, but they warned my parents that they would be keeping a close eye on our situation in case any further accidents occurred. As you can imagine, Vicky was really shaken, as were my parents later. My parents told me that they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother started crying and told me how I was tearing the family apart by involving outsiders. My father's disappointment was palpable. He always had words loaded with reproach as she questioned my decision to escalate the situation. I told her firmly that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities. But for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once I saw that I had been formally warned, my parents had a separate conversation with her. And from that day on, she stopped talking to me altogether. I much preferred this to having her constantly hovering over me or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents found out about this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the remainder of high school. They informed my parents, who didn't protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved. Here, the remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited me or called me in all that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them. Although it hurt me that they could so easily dismiss me as like I was nothing. When I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me and approached me, and I felt like I was a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there, and they scolded my parents for being so obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather told them. But my dad then awkwardly approached me, and I later found out that I was accepted into a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about it, because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I informed my grandparents about this, and they invited me out to dinner at a nice restaurant. After dinner, my grandmother posted pictures of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being an exceptional student. Our relatives soon found out and joined in the congratulations. I suppose some of them could have told my parents, who had no idea about all this, instead of being happy about it. My mother called me the next day to tell me that Vicky had locked herself in her room crying because she hadn't been accepted to any college, and that I was consciously trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades by talking to all our relatives. She told me that all of this was my fault, because apparently she was depressed after the incident with Child Protective Services, and I had pushed her to get bad grades. I was so incredibly heartbroken that my own mother could blame me for something like that. That was the last time I spoke to her. My grandparents helped me move into my college dorm, because my high school boyfriend's college was far away from me. We had broken up, so I went to college single. The breakup had been hard, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob, and he and I were both freshmen, and we both spent half of our days in the library. Rob was unlike anyone I had met before. He is a quiet person and liked to study, which was like me. and we quickly found common ground in our shared love for college. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized that I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond just friendship being outgoing. I was pretty direct about my feelings for Rob, and I was surprised to learn that he felt the same. We started dating and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents have met Rob and just adore him. I have met Rob's parents, who literally treat me like their own daughter at times. Rob's mother has even confessed to me how she has always wanted to have a daughter. So she is glad that Rob has met a wonderful person like me, to be honest. This is the first time I am surrounded by family who appreciate me and don't hold a grudge against me. I have told Rob stories from my childhood, and he listens to me and knows what my relationship with Vicky is like. Throughout these past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me except to send me an occasional birthday message if they remembered. But that's it. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were hiking to our usual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see how nervous he was to ask me the question, and I had no doubts in my mind when I accepted the proposal. I posted pictures of my engagement on my Instagram, and also informed my grandparents about it. They were so happy for me, and congratulated us on our future. I guess the news must have spread because my parents called me out of the blue to congratulate me. I also thought it was just a casual conversation since we hadn't spoken for years. They asked me about my life, my job, my apartment before my dad directly asked me if he could walk me by the arm to the altar. I was surprised by his sudden question, since a few moments earlier I had no idea what company he worked for. I told him that I hadn't thought about it yet, and my dad told me it would be embarrassing if I didn't invite him, and that others would question us about it, so it would be better if he walked me to the altar. I told my parents that I didn't even know if I was going to invite them to my wedding since we hadn't been in touch. But this upset my parents. My mother started telling me how she was disappointed by my answer, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She continued telling me how it would always be with my parents no matter what happens, and that I should let the past go. Part of me was tempted to listen to my parents and accept the offer from my dad, because I wanted our relationship to be repaired. But another part of me was hesitant, afraid of opening myself up again to possible disappointments and hurts. However, I was about to start a new chapter of my life in a few months, so I told my dad he could walk me by the arm down the aisle, and he seemed thrilled. During the wedding preparations, I reached out to my high school friends who I had always kept in touch with despite the physical distance that had grown between us. Due to our careers, I told them how I wanted the group to get together and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many happy tears and congratulations, and without hesitation they accepted my invitation to be a part of my bridal party, as it was a chance for us all to get together again. We all planned to go to Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party, while RCK had a separate bachelor party with his friends too. My friends and I posted a lot of party photos, and in general everyone had a lot of fun. However, when I returned home, my parents called me to inform me how disappointed they were that I had not invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them that there was no way I would involve Vicky in my bachelorette party, and that I did not want her to be a part of my life. This shocked my parents, and they asked me what I meant, so I clarified that Vicky's actions, particularly her history of lying and gossiping, had left me deeply hurt and distrustful of her intentions. I could not imagine inviting her to such an intimate and joyful occasion as my bachelorette party, knowing that her presence would make my party less happy. I also informed my parents that this was the reason why she was not invited to my wedding either. Upon hearing this, my parents lost their temper. They complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding, and that it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They told me that Vicky was excited to meet me after she found out I was getting married. I was confused, and I asked my parents what gave her that idea, since we hadn't even spoken for a long time. But my parents brushed off my concerns, saying that that's not how sisters behave. I told them they have to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated after everything that's happened. I just don't feel comfortable having her as a part of my wedding. She hasn't even apologized to me once for everything she put me through. However, my parents generally ignored my words. My mother kept saying how she wanted everything to be fixed and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. my father insisted that our relatives talk about why my sister wasn't invited, and this would end up affecting my wedding. However, I knew that it was better not to give in to their demands, so that I didn't give in to them. I told them that it was okay for people to talk behind my back and question my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I liked and trusted during my wedding. My mother then asked if my fiancé would be okay with this, and also tried to use the in-laws card as he would judge me for being so incredibly cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and in-laws knew my family dynamics, and neither of them would care if Vicky was present or not. They pressured me to suggest the importance of family unity and forgiveness. But I did not budge an inch due to the fact that I was not willing to compromise my own well-being for the sake of appeasing others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us holding on to our own perspectives, and my parents told me that they needed to think things through, and we ended up our conversation there. I informed my grandparents about this, because I was feeling a little guilty for confronting my parents, and they supported me completely. My grandparents told me that I shouldn't force myself to invite anyone I didn't want there, and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since this conversation, I have felt a little better about my decision, and have been distracting myself with wedding preparations since my wedding is approaching quickly. Last week, my dad called me to inform me that he had thought a lot, and that he and Mom would no longer be attending the wedding before I could react. He went on to say that this also meant that he would not be walking me down the aisle. I asked him if there was a specific reason, and he informed me that Vicky would be moving to a new place soon, which my parents had helped her find, and since I was going to exclude her from the wedding, she had decided to host a housewarming party that very day, so would attend at the place of my wedding. I couldn't believe what my father was telling me, because I wasn't being invited in the first place, let alone he was going to walk me down the aisle. But he considered telling me that he was the one who decided not to do it. However, the idea that my own sister's housewarming party was taking priority over my wedding was a hard hit. That was a continuation of what I had felt for years. I simply told him I understood and hung up the call. Although I tried to act brave in front of my father deep down, the pain of rejection affected me when I told Rob I was furious at how insensitive my parents could be after they were the ones who insisted on being invited. It was he who gave me the idea that I should ask my grandfather, since he and Grandma were basically there in my life more than my parents. I agreed. So I called my grandparents and asked them if would be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't contain myself as I asked my grandfather, "You and Grandpa have always been there for me," I said with my voice breaking with emotion. "They have been only grandparents, have been like parents to me, and I can't imagine anyone else I would want to have by my side on my wedding day." My grandfather didn't even hesitate before saying yes. He told me how honored he would be to walk me down the aisle, and unlike my parents, I would not be disappointed. His words calmed me, and in that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace with my grandparents by my side. I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me just as I am with all my imperfections. I also spoke to my father-in-law about this, and ours parents assured me that they didn't care if my parents didn't attend, and that regardless of their presence, they were thrilled to witness and support our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back thinking it was an emergency, and when he answered, he asked me if it was true that my grandfather would walk me down the aisle. I told him, yes, it was true, and then my dad got mad saying how disrespectful it was that I asked my grandfather. I reminded him how he was the one who decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why I was so upset. My dad continued yelling at me about how he and Mom were just trying to make me see the wrongness of my actions, and that they thought that by declining the invitation, they would teach me a lesson. He went on to say how he and Mom had raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandfather had no right to replace him. I tried to reason with him, explaining that my grandfather had been there for me in ways that he and Mom never were, but he wouldn't listen. He also told me how I had done nothing but push everyone away from me, and that this was all my fault. I don't think I did anything wrong in this situation. I guess everyone would have done the same, but like the subreddit requires me to ask the question, am I the bad one for asking my grandpa to walk me down the aisle and not my dad? Update 1. Many weighed in, and most said I was not the bad one. I have seen a lot of advice and suggestions on how I should approach this situation. I agree that I need to permanently cut off contact with my parents, because their constant indecisiveness is exhausting and is starting to affect my mental health. I do not want them to be in my life when I have consistently been shown that Vicky is always her first priority. My parents are selfish, and I have known this for a long time. However, how can a daughter just stop loving her parents? It is much easier said than done, but it is very hard to do in reality. However, for my peace of mind, I have no choice but to do so I can enjoy my wedding tomorrow. Update 2. I am sorry for the lack of update this past month, but I have been pretty busy since my wedding in the first place. Yes, my wedding was pretty good with my grandpa at my side as I walked down the aisle despite the absence of my parents. I couldn't be happier as I exchanged vows with Rob, committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced the night away, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to stay in touch with your childhood friends no matter what, because sometimes they are your chosen family during the reception. I felt a slight pain as I realized my parents weren't there to share this special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I found comfort in the knowledge that I had made the right decision for me, prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave speeches, sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that had carried us through both good and bad times. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on a honeymoon that his parents had paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days just lazing around, enjoying with my husband. I feel so excited every time I look at Rob and realize he is now married to me. As I mentioned earlier, I cut off all contact with my parents, blocking him everywhere. I didn't bother to send them an explanation, because frankly, they don't even deserve it. I have no idea if Vicky really had a housewarming party that day, or if it was just an excuse for me not to attend my wedding. But at this point, I don't care. I wish nothing but the best to them and their darling daughter. Update 3. I had no intention of sharing more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know about it. I hadn't checked my email in the last month because of my wedding and honeymoon, but today while I was checking emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found my email address, and I was completely surprised. I hesitated whether to open his email or just delete it without reading it. But as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Inside was a long message from Vicky expressing her regret for our strained relationship and her desire to reconcile. She acknowledged the mistakes she had made in the past, admitting that she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. She continued to write how she feels happy for me now that I am married and that she wishes me nothing but the best. She ended the email by pleading me not to punish my parents by cutting them off and that they missed me. As I read her words, I felt a mix of emotions, surprise, skepticism. Part of me wants to believe that Vicky has really changed, that she is sincere in her apology and is willing to work to repair our relationship. But another part of me remains doubtful, because this seems too good to be true. However, regardless of what I have written, I know for a fact that my parents do not miss me, because if they did, they would not have treated me like this all these years. I thought about sending her a reply, but then decided not to. After all, forgiveness is not something that should be rushed. It is a process that requires time and reflection. Still, I don't know if I want to be in a relationship with her again. I could forgive her, but that doesn't mean that we are now going to be finally sisters. To be honest, after my marriage, I no longer feel alone. I have learned to recognize that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and unwavering love from my grandparents. And with their support, I know I can face any challenge that comes without needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I have also researched and found a good therapist with whom I have booked my first appointment. I have taken this step so that I can address and resolve any wounds from my past and heal from them. Update 4. I think I did well not to answer the email I mentioned in the last update, because now everything comes to light. It turns out that Vicky did not write anything, and that it was my parents using her account. That is why I was so emphasizing that I should forgive my parents. Because it was they who had written, I know it because I ran into Vicky by chance one day. And when I greeted her, she looked at me with a disgusted face as always. I commented about the email, since I thought that my lack of response was the problem, and she told me that she had not sent me anything. She took out her phone and found the email in the inbox. But she swore that she had not written anything at that moment. We both realized who was the author of that, since surely some computer in the house still had Vicky's session open. I also asked her about the party inauguration of her house, and she told me that that had not happened. So as I suspected it was all a lie from my parents, then each one continued on her path. And that was it. I honestly don't know who was worse in my life, my sister or my parents. Because at this point, what happened to my parents is already too twisted. At least now everyone will know because I made a post on my Instagram with the links to my Reddit. So all the family and people close to me are reading this story.